In 1962, a 51-year-old man named Clarence Earl Gideon sat in a Florida state prison cell. He had no money, legal training, and no lawyer. Gideon was charged with breaking and entering a pool room with intent to commit a misdemeanor, a non-capital felony under Florida law. At his arraignment, he appeared without funds and asked the trial court to appoint counsel to assist him. The judge refused. State law at the time permitted the court to appoint counsel for indigent defendants only if they were facing the death penalty. Forced to proceed alone, Gideon conducted his own defense. He made an opening statement and cross-examined the state's witnesses, but he was navigating a complex legal system against a trained prosecutor. The jury found him guilty, and he was sentenced to 5 years in the state penitentiary. From his cell, Gideon drafted a petition to the Supreme Court of the United States. He wrote it in pencil, using block capitals on lined prison paper. This single, handwritten document was the only recourse an unrepresented, impoverished defendant had to challenge the judicial apparatus of a state. The American criminal trial operates as an adversary system. It is a contest of evidence and procedure, designed with the assumption that both sides will be represented by competent advocates before a neutral judge. When one chair at the defense table remains empty, that contest breaks down. An unrepresented layman is forced to navigate the rules of hearsay, cross-examination, and evidentiary standards against a state prosecutor specifically trained to secure convictions. The court was forced to decide if the Constitution permits a state to withhold legal representation from those too poor to afford it. Without legal representation on both sides, the structural integrity of the adversarial process fails to function as a reliable mechanism for discovering the truth. In 1962, the answer to that question was governed by a precedent from 20 years earlier, the 1942 decision Betts v. Brady, authored by Justice Owen Roberts. The Betts majority held that while the Sixth Amendment guarantees the right to counsel in federal courts, this guarantee was not fundamental to the states. Instead, the court established a different test for state trials, the special circumstances rule. This flexible assessment required states to appoint counsel only if circumstances like youth, illiteracy, or the unusual complexity of the charges made proceeding alone fundamentally unfair. But the line proved unworkable. Appellate courts were drawn into endless, after-the-fact assessments, trying to guess if a trial had been fair enough. This instability had been predicted by Justice Hugo Black. In his dissenting opinion in Betts, Black argued that the right to counsel was deeply fundamental. Treating a constitutional safeguard as a sliding scale of fairness yielded an arbitrary system of justice across the states. Justice Black was assigned the majority opinion in Gideon v. Wainwright. This time, he spoke for a unanimous court. The decision did not chip away at the existing precedent. It explicitly and expressly overruled Betts v. Brady. Black based his opinion on reality. State and federal governments spend vast sums to establish the machinery to try defendants. These nearly universal practices demonstrate a shared societal belief that lawyers in criminal courts are necessities, not luxuries.
Justice Clark
argued that the Constitution draws no distinction between capital and non-capital cases, but it was Justice John Marshall Harlan who drafted the pivotal separate opinion. He agreed Betts should be overruled, but he vigorously rejected incorporation. Harlan insisted the right to counsel should be grounded directly in pure 14th Amendment fundamental fairness, asking only what due process requires in state proceedings. This debate isolates a long-standing tension in constitutional law, applying specific federal guarantees selectively versus evaluating state trials through generalized fundamental fairness. Gideon solved the practical problem of the empty chair, but left open a generational theoretical debate over how the Constitution constrains state power. The 1963 ruling mandated counsel for indigent felony defendants. The subsequent legal and historical context further defined that right in practice. On remand in Florida, Clarence Earl Gideon was retried for breaking and entering. This time, represented by a court-appointed lawyer, he was acquitted by the jury. Declaring a constitutional right in a judicial opinion does not automatically fund, staff, or enforce that right on the ground. The court ensured that defendants like Clarence Earl Gideon would no longer face the state alone. But closing the gap between a guaranteed lawyer and systemic equal justice remains the unfinished business of the case.